This is Halleck Hoffman speaking from the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara. The center was established by the Fund for the Republic to clarify basic questions of freedom and justice, especially those raised by the emerging power of 20th century institutions. The center is currently examining such areas as the economic order, the political process, science and technology, communications, law, labor, education, the American character, war, and peace. The method of the study is dialogue and discussion. The members of the center meet almost daily to talk among themselves and with a variety of visitors, many of them specialists in one or another of the areas under examination by the center. Occasionally, staff members are invited to address groups outside the center. The talk you are about to hear, The College, Its Expectations and Implications, was delivered at Central Washington State College. The speaker, W.H. Ferry, is a vice president of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions and formerly an instructor at Choate School. Mr. Ferry.
My remarks today fall into four parts. I shall omit the customary declarations of incompetence and go directly and briefly into what the pollsters, congressmen, and other less recondite sources have to tell us about what society expects of the college. There will follow a few pages on the aims of higher education, as culled from philosophers, potentates, the managed and the managers of the educational business, parents, students, and taxpayers. The implications of the foregoing information for the college today and tomorrow will be taken up in the third section. It is here that the question of the appropriate connection between society's expectations and the college itself will be discussed. I did not say answered. The concluding portion will include the ideas and information and considerations that could not conveniently be squeezed into the first three parts, but will, I fear, shed little more than a flickering light across the vast and murky landscape called American values. This is a pity, for I hoped when accepting this assignment to have something to say worth your while and mine. It is not our fault, however, if the territory we have chosen to survey is the country's most heavily traveled. Education is a field in which Americans have always felt highly vocal and expertly qualified by nature. It is a topic, I think, that even outranks sex in perennial interest, despite sex's slight historical lead as a human enterprise. One's quest, therefore, tends to end up on the same broad road, on a superhighway of the obvious. I shall do my best to avoid telling you too many things you know already, so you will not have much of an account of education's financial needs, nor of the preferred position of the natural sciences, nor census counts of the oncoming school population, nor comparisons of how much more or less Americans spend on chewing tobacco or hairnets than they do on education. However, the furrows cut by Thorstein Veblen and other confirmed prophets of the educational condition are impossible to avoid, and you are certain to recognize many of them as we bump along. Let me also say that qualifying phrases should often be used in what follows: that not all institutions are as incorrigible as they may sometimes appear, that not every faculty member is engaged in a holy crusade against or for the Philistinism of his administration, nor does every college student feel he is being intellectually shortchanged. It may be just as well, in fact, to say at the beginning how this story comes out. Viewed as an investment house might appraise an industry, higher education today is in promising shape. It is in a seller's market. Its supply of raw materials is boundless. It has caught the fancy of the investing public, and its product is deemed indispensable. In a nation in which the service industry is the rising monarch, it is the service industry non-pareil. But if the college is ranged against nobler criteria, the judgment is quite different. Measured against the real needs of the country, not those trivial and transitory summons that are too often labeled needs, the American college is letting the side down badly. At least to one observer, the college is floundering in a bog of self-doubt, contradictory purposes, public relations, and intellectual inertia. The face of brisk businesslike behavior that the college presents publicly obscures a crisis of self-confidence. Cloudiness about its aims promises indefinitely to postpone the day when the college will get to the task which it, and only it among all institutions, is qualified to undertake, that of preparing each generation to take a responsible and self-governing role in a world more and more overwhelmed by novelty, more and more beset by circumstances and possibilities never before confronted. Society's expectations of college can be put in a word: everything. There is no aspiration, no desire, no goal inconsequential enough not to be seen by someone as proper to be embraced by the college. The temptation to support this statement with a catalog of lunacies and extravagances is strong, but will be put aside, since majors in acrobatics, institutes for morticians, and degrees in cosmetology are academic oddities well known to almost everyone. Society also expects the college to be well-behaved and respectable. It expects a certain docility. If the college insists on exposing students to novel or unorthodox ideas, society requires that such exposure be instantly balanced by a presentation of the other side, though it does not require the opposite of this proposition. Society regards as beyond challenge the statement that he who pays the piper can call the tune. Thus, the art of withholding money is almost as well developed as that of giving it. The college is not expected to be a disturber of anyone's peace of mind, and is expected to worry more about the image it presents than the intellectual activity it promotes. But all of these expectations, while important, are nevertheless at the fringe, and our concern must be with those central expectancies bearing generally on higher education. The most widely held expectation is that a college education should be available for anyone who wishes to have it, providing only that a minimum of aptitude be shown. Next, college is expected to make life easier for those getting through it. The statistics are clear on the monetary worth of a diploma, and this is referred to incessantly by students, high school counselors, parents, employers, in short, by society. Since money and success are synonyms, chances of success depend on at least 2 and preferably 4 years of college. A study of many polls on American attitudes toward higher education, reported by Stuart Chase in American Credos, leads him to conclude, we are all for education. But what do Americans hope for? Is it knowledge, wisdom, a better understanding of the world and themselves? Alas, no. Only a tiny minority desires that. Most of us, Chase says, want more education to enable us to earn more money. A college education is now more widely regarded for its economic and status values than for the intellectual training it is supposed to afford. We are so preoccupied in adapting to material change that we hardly notice where the changes are taking us. Popular indifference to educational content is corroborated by all surveys." Unquote. The mundane quality of these aspirations is, of course, faithfully reflected in youths about to enter college. They are going, they say, for the following reasons, arranged in order of priority. First, to have a good time. Second, to play football. Third, to make business contacts. Fourth, to meet attractive co-eds. Finally, to learn something. There is no need to certify further what everyone knows, that society sees college primarily as a preliminary stage of engagement in the economic pageant. Its chief tasks to supply the working papers, social graces, vocational skills, and future entrees into the business world. I have enough familiarity with what is going on to realize that this is not the exclusive menu that colleges are serving their students, though the information that keeps percolating into the professional press often leaves that impression. I shall just say that it is a considerable part. But I do not intend in any case to deal with content in these remarks, for I am satisfied to go ahead on the unstated assumption in the topic I was asked to discuss. The unstated assumption is that society's expectations and the programs of the college are in some direct correspondence, and I believe that this cannot be challenged. David Boroff was perhaps only a little overharsh when he recently declared that the result of this correspondence was, quote, the familiar mix of educational supermarket, employment agency, and daycare center that most colleges have become, unquote. There is another overriding public expectation, that the campus shall become a major resource for the Cold War. I shall have a good deal to say about this later on, and mention it now because of its prominence in the list of general expectations. Meanwhile, it can be noted that the central question is whether society's expectations should control the program and conduct of the college. Democratic theory seems to require an affirmative answer. It is the idea of consumer sovereignty brought to roost on the campus. The public pays the cost through tax exemption, tax support, contributions, fees, and so on. Should not so grand a quo be met by a corresponding quid? If the college does not exist to meet overwhelmingly expressed public expectations, for what does it exist? The ghost of Adam Smith may be glimpsed hovering between the lines of this argument. If we are convinced that the general welfare is only the sum of individuals striving for their own self-interest, it is logical that education should be devoted to sharpening the tools of each person to enable him to do his best in the marketplace. This justification is seldom put forward, but nonetheless seems to me to have had a powerful influence, both theoretically and practically, on education in this country. Whether explicit or not, this viewpoint took over the field slowly but surely from those who, like President Joseph McKeon of Bowdoin, believe that colleges are founded and endowed for the common good and not for the private advantage of those who resort to them for education, unquote. This brings me to part two of these remarks, dealing with the aims of colleges. I believe that Americans, perhaps subconsciously, expect their colleges to be better than themselves. I believe that they have grander hopes for their citadels of learning than the evidence appears to show, that the people know better than to wish their colleges to perpetuate the accepted and the commonplace. If this higher consensus did not exist, the great aims of higher education would long ago have been smothered and heard of no more. But if these aims are often clad in 4th of July fustian when expressed, and while they are often broached in practice, even as they are preached in public, the fact that they are still stated and applauded shows that higher education and the public in general retain a sense of the college's true vocation, a respect for its ancient virtues. These are almost the only optimistic words you will hear from me, for I see little evidence that this sense is prospering in contemporary America. All that can be said is that it survives, with occasional flashes of revival here and there. The high-mindedness of our aims is unquestioned. A recent historian of education concludes that the motto of all higher education nowadays is that of the University of Chicago: let knowledge grow from more to more, and thus be human life enriched. David Boroff, in the article mentioned earlier, sees the college as the institution dedicated to fostering critical intelligence and an awareness of principles that govern our behavior and understanding. Harold Taylor thinks of the college as a place where students are given a chance to explore the content, size, and limits of their talents and themselves, and to deal directly with the biggest issues of the 20th century. The Chancellor of Washington University recently said that the central function of higher education is to train the minds of students so they will have a better chance of achieving wisdom. On April 4 in Los Angeles, Mr. Eisenhower said that education must show the way to practical and honorable means of living peacefully with other nations. In a return to the lilting rhetoric that brightened many a presidential press conference, Mr. Eisenhower, and I quote, described university campuses as the shock troops in the battle for peaceful solutions of the world's troubles, unquote. Quotations like these, all on the theme that the college is devoted to thought, to the making of good men, to the search for truth and independence. Such quotations could be extended endlessly, as I scarcely need to tell those among you who have listened to them during many a procession of June and September days. Perhaps Richard Price sounded the tuning fork as well as anyone when he wrote in 1784 that the end of education is to direct the powers of the mind. Its business should be to teach how to think rather than what to think, to lead into the best way of searching for truth. Education ought to be an initiation into candor rather than into any system of faith. It should form the habit of cool and patient investigation." Unquote. Aims of this lofty character are not, to be sure, the only ones enunciated down the years. A view of the college as the forcing bed for better farmers, mechanics, or merchants became a polar position in the debate attending the coincidental development of higher education and industry from the mid-19th century onward. In fact, the debate was long ago substantially won by advocates of this position. Yet the idealism of what has come to be known as the classical viewpoint persists, and I am not convinced by recent historians of education that this idea is today an anachronism. But our purpose today is not to reopen this old argument, but to consider where we are going as we follow the prevailing winds. We come now to part 3. I am tired of trying to be judicious, quotation scholarly, fair-minded, exhausted with the effort of writing paragraphs that seem to start on the one hand and end with ponderings on the other. The college should be devoted to quality, but has fallen in love with quantity. We are getting little help from the college in sorting out current bewilderments about democracy. It looks as though colleges are as confused as anyone on this topic, for despite a patrimony of self-government, they themselves grow more oligarchical all the time. Far more significant, they tend to justify their steady capitulation to public pressure by saying that it is the democratic way. The argument is the one used by television networks. They say that the public decides that the evening air shall be loud with gunshot and hoofbeats. It is also the classical economic argument for allocation of resources, which ties democratic theory to the market by describing each purchase of a commodity or service as a vote in favor of that particular use of the resource. Majoritarianism and quantification are thus brought together. But is the college to be joined by low analogy to television operatives or manufacturers? If quality rather than quantity is not to be the concern of the college, to whom shall it be assigned? Whatever it should be, the college should not be the stronghold of the common denominator. I think, in short, that higher education is flunking the course these days, whatever its earlier grades might have been. The tests I am using are those supplied by the highest values that Americans allege, and those presented by the exigencies of the times. The college, far from helping to raise the tone of the republic, is cooperating in the debasement of its ideals. Far from lighting up and leading the dramatic changes that are occurring in every circumstance of contemporary life, the college is lost in the dust swirling around the stragglers. If one sees the college's function in such terms, to be sure, the assignment is one of the greatest rigor. Past and future wars, the dynamism of technique, psychology's erosion of the self, and the poles of ideology have made quality into an idea terribly difficult to isolate. How much, how big, how many are far easier questions. Value has been transformed into a sometime thing, a misty relativism. The student's anxious query is about quality, whether there are values or whether there are merely personal preferences. If there are no moral standards, there can be no moral contamination, no collective or personal responsibility for the quality and action of society. The qualitative void is a real one. The poignancy of a group of Harvard students in 1961 may be remembered. They said they were organizing quote, to force our teachers to be men, unquote. A more immediate reason why the college is failing is because it has unresistingly turned from a community into a corporation. This alteration presents many difficulties, one of which is encountered in preparing remarks like these. What does one have in mind when he says, the college? Does he refer to trustees, or buildings, or administrators, or alumni clamoring for field houses, or students, programs, or faculties? When I speak of the college with hope in my voice, I am thinking of a community of scholars, young and old, students and faculty, but I am thinking mostly of students. When I speak with reproach, I refer to a jumbled combination of administrators, fundraisers, image experts, and employment agents. Neither is a full or fair characterization, yet there is a natural hostility between the groups, between those transacting with the public and those engaged in the educational transaction. And it is a hostility which we must recognize and comment on. A formidable aspect of the change from community, a hopeful word, to corporation, a reproachful one, is that it makes the college irresponsible. A community is established to accept common responsibility and to ensure the dignity of its participants. A corporation is established to limit responsibility, and it ensures personal anonymity. A community has members and values and standards springing out of shared experience and tradition. The corporation has functionaries and values based on the requirements of profit, public relations, and efficiency. Both have their place, but they are not the same thing. Yet the notion is widespread that the college improves each time it adopts another corporate style. Much has been written about the demoralization wrought in the college by the notions of profit, that is, more and more money each year, and by public relations, that is, less and less controversy each year. The imperatives of efficiency are just as deadly, if less noticed. Efficiency accounts for the metamorphosis of the administration building into a hive of experts and specialists. Witlessly taking the great corporations as a model, the college assumes that bigger means better, and that better means more efficient. Yet the relationship of efficiency to education has never been established, any more than has a necessary relationship between efficiency and size. The college has merely gobbled down another indigestible hunk of the corporate myth, becoming thereby, like the crocodile that swallowed the suitcase, fatter but not better. I do not want to press the corporation community figure of speech too hard. I know that the university is in fact one of the grandparents of the business corporation, and that colleges are legally corporations. As for corporate irresponsibility and anonymity, I can hear someone objecting, but what about the electric company cases? Corporations were found guilty and fined, but real people also went to jail, didn't they? But the electric company executives went to jail for crimes of commission, and my lament about the college is not so much what it does, but what it fails to do. The commonest excuse for such sins of omission as the neglect of intellectual pursuits is that society no longer expects it. Similarly, crimes of commission by the college, like courses in comic book writing, concrete mixing, and dude ranching, are justified by appeal to what society needs and expects. The essence of the situation is in the irresponsibility of such a claim by the college. It is an assertion that the college can engage in any folly as long as it can be charged off as the responsibility of society, which says it wants or needs that particular folly. The doctrine of meeting society's wants and needs finds its most ardent expression in the public school system, where popular control has achieved bizarre effects. One of the most grievous of these effects is to leave thousands of high school graduates semi-literate and unprepared to go on with their educations, while fitting them out excellently as drivers of cars, appliers of first aid, and baton twirlers. The college, in turn, passes its own illiterates into the world, trained perhaps in a narrow skill, but certainly not educated. The trouble in the public schools, as in the colleges, lies in the word need, and not in the idea of popular control. Some form of public control in a democracy is inevitable, but popular control does not automatically assure a good result. The problem here is educating the community as to the wise use of its power, formal or informal, over the educational process. It cannot be argued that the educational machine decides the aims of society, or that it should do so. But one of the liveliest duties of education is to instruct society about its real needs, distinguishing them from the parochial and whimsical. There is a critical difference between the justified and the irrelevant claims on education. Examples are plentiful. Bemused by insurance company statistics and pictures of bloody accidents, parents are easily persuaded that driver training is needed in the high school. Hypnotized by the power and popularity of some interest group, a college is easily persuaded that a project the interest group would like to see installed, say training in behind-the-counter sales tactics, is indeed needed in its curriculum. Except in the widest sense of the word, these illustrations cannot be accepted as educational needs. Anyone lately initiated to California freeways, as I have been, would never argue against the desirability of better trained drivers. And anyone recalling many bruising encounters in Manhattan stores, as I do, cannot decry the pleasures of polite service. But training in these arts, even though a need of the community, does not thereby become a duty of the school or college. Given all the time in the world, all the money in the world, and perpetual adolescence, a case might be made for the incorporation of such activities in the educational enterprise. In the absence of such conditions, the task of the enterprise is to resist such meretricious demands by patiently instructing society, sorting out silly wants and real needs, showing the proper relation of the aims of education to the lasting ends of society. But this is not what is happening. There seems to be rather a wholesale misunderstanding or deliberate misuse of the doctrine of needs by American education. The chief observation to be made about the present interpretation of the doctrine of wants and needs is that it is impractical. It doesn't work. Though practicality is the chief claim of its advocates, the evidence is that this approach is sterile as far as the overreaching worries of society and the civic responsibilities of the individual are concerned. Stuart Chase, after contemplating all of the important surveys of opinion made in this country over the past generation, sorrowfully says that Americans are, first, unaware of the imperatives of the nuclear age. Next, unaware of the massive effects of technology on our lives and on our future. Third, ignorant of the true goals of education. Fourth, ignorant of the Bill of Rights and what it means to a democratic society. This does not end Chase's enumeration, but it is enough to make one wonder about what education and educators have been doing all this time. Here, and on this point, is the chief and tragic implication of the honoring of society's expectations by the college. We have had more education for more people for a longer period than any nation in history. The result is that we are not prepared for the new world, which, ironically, is principally of our own making. Education is, after all, supposed to be habit-forming, and the campus the place where man's most civilizing habit is to be built. Instilling the intellectual habits and skills needed to cope with all of the simultaneously arrived ages, the ages of affluence, technology, revolution, bureaucracy, alienation, and instant suicide, making men habitually ready to live wisely in these ages is the foremost duty of education. Where else in a self-governing nation is the obligation to be placed? Home and church have their responsibilities for character and morals. But if civilization fails and falls, the failure will be mainly that of education. It will show, if any are left to see, that there was much more violence than wisdom in the world, and blame will be assessed against the agency that bears primary responsibility for keeping up an adequate supply of this more and more scarce resource. In its willingness to abide by the professed needs of the community, the campus has not taken note of the future, and is not doing so today, with the future hard upon us. This, I repeat, is the principal meaning of meeting society's expectations today. The college is not doing very well either as a conserver of tradition, a purpose one would think likely to be well served indeed by an institution so warmly attached to the status quo. Consider, for example, a tradition eminently worth conserving, that of democracy itself. That vision of a self-governing commonwealth with all of its citizenry taking part in discussion and activity toward common goals. But this tradition is washing away under the tides of bureaucracy and the every man for himself spirit that is our unfortunate legacy from Adam Smith. The college is helping little here. Tradition, of course, is not to be conserved for its own or fond memory's sake, like one of great-grandmother's samplers, but to be of future use to humanity. Yet, as Kenneth Boulding reminds us, the university is the only agency in society which is committed to the future rather than to the past, which is committed to mankind rather than to any segment of it, and which is committed to the truth rather than to a particular version of it." Unquote. Another tradition high in the American hierarchy of values is that of individualism. This, too, is a casualty today, and one wonders whether in any decent sense it will ever reappear. I am not talking about individualism of the rugged variety, even though this kind of virtuosity is being more and more resigned to the great corporations. I refer to the cultivation and dignity and independence of the individual person as the proper object of public policy. The college's best efforts could not have saved intact the self-reliant, well-informed, and public-spirited Jeffersonian man from the pressures squeezing him from every side. If, however, it had stuck more closely to its primary job of developing men's rational powers, there is some chance that there would be substance behind some of our older values, where slogans instead now rule. If the college had not consistently understood or misunderstood this value of individualism as the promotion of self-interest, and had taught it as the independence of a well-trained mind instead, we would today have a better hope of getting through the lethal thickets all around us. The great debate going on about the Cold War, for instance, is not a competition in rational argument. The conversation resembles more a drone of black-white slogans about the good guys and the bad guys. The appeals are largely to primeval passions, to a crude opposition of us against them. But certainly this is not the issue, and just as certainly millions of Americans realize that it is not. Yet where are all the individual voices? Where are the challenges? Those few occasionally and dimly heard are drowned in patriotic cliches, many of them, alas, coming from the administration building on campus. Mayor Daley of Chicago once made a relevant historical observation when he thought he was uttering a profundity. He said, "It is the duty of the university to raise us to ever higher platitudes of thought." The problem today is not so much to discover new virtues and values as to rescue those we have from vacuity. This is the jurisdiction of the college, though not its jurisdiction solely. Democracy, as we all know, tends to go overboard. Living democratically is living dangerously. The voice of the people is often that of a great and vengeful beast. Democracy's feat so far has been to overcome its built-in proclivity to self-destruction. The fact that it has not yet utterly done away with itself does not mean that it will not or cannot be done. The great bombs make it a physical cinch, and general apathy threatens to make it a psychological cinch. Gerald W. Johnson calls this possibility the central problem of our current predicament. It seems so urgent and so frightening that to its solution should be applied every resource we can command," unquote. This would seem to be practical enough advice for a practically inclined institution like the college to adopt. Another practical question promising to harass the country indefinitely is that of the workless or semi-workless society. How shall we arrange our politics and economics when full employment as a feasible goal is thrown into the discard? Technology is a far more formidable threat to democratic theory than the Russian-Chinese heresy. It looks as though technology is carrying us rapidly into a 20th century version of the half-free, half-slave society of 4th century Athens. Today's slaves, the machines, are creating a new class that democratic theory has never wound into its calculus, a class of permanently unemployed. The alarmed clatter being heard from Washington in the last few months is that of a belated recognition by administration economists and others of this totally new possibility. Not even college presidents are more tyrannized by received opinion than economists. And though they are not yet ready to take down the full employment sign, a good many of these economists now perceive that the sign is swinging dangerously loose in the tempests of technical development. Now, it will be protested that higher education is not in shape to take on such challenges. It can be argued that today's completely novel issues of war and peace and the unemployed society are too large and unwieldy for the college to handle. I did not say that the task is an easy one, or that the educational enterprise in its present frame of mind would be able to do it. The necessary reconstruction would be an enormous undertaking, accompanied by an equally enormous job of reforming public opinion, for only a sharply reformed public opinion would support the drastic alterations that are needed. But mere difficulty is not an adequate excuse. As far as that goes, no excuse at all has to be offered by the college if there is no need for a great redirection of the institution, as I think there is. That is, if it can be shown that the intellectual resources necessary to meet the deep needs of a brand new society can be developed better elsewhere. Perhaps all this sounds merely peevish, or worse, windy. Perhaps I am preaching the salvation road without a precise road map. To some extent this is true. That is because, like the public, I expect everything of education too. In particular, I expect everything of the college. I see no way out of any of the disastrous fixes we have got into except through education. We must think our way out of the Cold War since we cannot fight our way out. We cannot eliminate technology from our lives by any act of modern Ludditism, or by turning our backs on its disagreeable consequences and hoping they will disappear. We cannot buy our way out of our responsibilities in the congesting world. No kind Ferry is going to banish angst, alienation, and sensations of purposelessness from personal lives trapped in an impersonal culture. If there is any way through these tangled issues, it must be via thought and wisdom, and such a requirement takes us back to the college, or should do so, for in theory at least it is the only institution dedicated to the inculcation of these faculties. There are, or should be, auxiliary aids, the arts, for example, or politics. Even the mass media may someday recover sufficiently from their infatuation with entertainment to take a serious part. Yet the responsibility is first of all that of the educational process. I have suggested that the record shows how poorly this ultimate purpose is being served now. The nation is intellectually under-equipped to tackle the Himalayan issues before us, and resorts to the simplifications and slogans that may be the death of us all. The country, for example, is transfixed by the word communism. In public life, in corporation and union, from grammar school through the university, The word communist has dictated the dreariest kind of policies for 15 years or more. The college has had almost nothing but good to say about Cold War goals and programs. One knows of the few faculty members here and there who have raised protesting voices. But who can recall the last time he heard a college president say, loud and clear, that what we are doing is all wrong, or that perhaps the public has a slightly erroneous notion about communism in general? The failure to dissent may be properly interpreted as consent to what is going on. Does the virtually unanimous failure to criticize the present drift really mean that there is unanimity among the paladins of higher education as to the rightness of what is going on? This would be a most depressing comment, more appropriate to a flock of sheep than to a flock of leaders. I do not propose college courses in the Cold War. I do not ask that every college president denounce the Pentagon. I suggest that there is only one way of improving the Republic and its chances of getting through the years ahead without a domestic or international catastrophe. That is by criticism. So it must be noted that neither of government's constitutionally endowed critics, the press and the college, are raising any basic objections about our conduct of the Cold War. We hear a good deal about the convergence of the American and Soviet systems. Maybe this is a good example, with both American and Soviet universities quietly going along with their governments. The managers of the education business, and, sorry to say, most of the hired hands, have bowed beneath the weight of the word communism. This is another serious implication of society's exactions. Our educators are conforming, most of them because they would conform anyway, and many because the public expects them to conform. They know that harboring or uttering dangerous thoughts is a sin punishable in the 50 states by loss of job and social ostracism. They know, these faculty members, that McCarthyism is far from dead, that it has only become housebroken and less raucous. I come down hard on this matter because it illustrates so clearly the conscious withdrawal of the college from criticism of the paramount issues of the times. Applause is not discussion, and it is not criticism. It is only a sad measure of reaction and conformity in the college. This is not just a deplorable sociological datum that I am talking about. It is historically significant when the agencies entrusted with criticism become mouthpieces for official policy. The college, in my judgment, has thus succumbed. There can be little doubt that anti-communism reaches deep and unchallenged into the educational process on every level. Loyalty oaths, high school courses in anti-communism, and the like. Those Pentagon grants which have become the lifeblood of great universities only represent anti-communism in its most dignified and expensive garments. The campus, in submitting to public expectation and official propaganda, has all but abandoned its independence. It has apparently enlisted in the Cold War for the duration. Bertrand Russell reminds us that education and literacy, when put into the service of the state, need not be blessings. In the 18th century, he writes, most wars were unpopular. But since men have been able to read the newspapers, wars have been popular, unquote. The popularity of the Cold War, at least to some degree, may be attributed to the enthusiastic non-criticism of the college. We come now to part 4 of these meditations. To recapitulate, I think the college's duty toward society's expectations is to meet them when by the institution's own highest standards they are just and rational, and to reform these expectations through education of the public when they are unjust or irrational. The college's way of dealing with these expectations is in the institutional attitudes toward critical issues and what is presented to students. For I insist that in the end the students are the reason for all the efforts. The business of education, as someone has said, is young men and young women. Public preoccupation with material success and with the Cold War holds the college in a tightening sheath nowadays. This brings us back to the classical dilemma in democracy, described by Plato in the 8th book of the Republic. The dialogue proceeds. And so they grow richer and richer, says Socrates, and the more they think of making a fortune, the less they think of virtue. For when riches and virtue are placed together in the scales of the balance, the one always rises as the other falls. That's true, says Adeimantus. And in proportion as riches and rich men are honored in the state, virtue and the virtuous are dishonored, Socrates says. Clearly so, Adeimantus replies. And what is honored is cultivated, and that which has no honor is neglected, Socrates argues. That is obvious, says Adeimantus. And so at last, Socrates concludes, instead of loving contention and glory, men become lovers of trade and money. They honor and look up to the rich man and make a ruler of him. End of quotation. There can be no disputing, I believe, that that which is honored in a country is cultivated there. Perhaps the paraphrase could be, what is valued in a country is taught there. The question is whether democracy, with its overtones of equalitarianism and vox populi, requires the results now being obtained in higher education. We appear to be more and more answering yes to this query. The aims that we say we pursue and the values that we in fact honor are two separate domains. Earning is placed far higher than learning. Thus the colleges are not confused. They cultivate what seems to be more esteemed in the United States, which now cherishes the credit card far more than the mind. This is the answer to Jacques Barzun's question, why has the United States college and university so little connection with the intellect? The connection will be reestablished only when the college itself takes the initiative in showing why it should be made. There should be no shyness on this point. An egghead, after all, is only a man who is fond of his mind and glad he has one. It may be, of course, that we have passed into a new stage in history with a new edifice of values, one perhaps based on science, anti-communism, and public relations, which will in the long run prove as serviceable as the old. But I do not think that anyone, even the most confirmed relativist, will seriously argue that we are at this point. Otherwise, we should not have the constant and often hypocritical obeisance to ancient virtues, as when a college president proclaims his deep attachment to academic freedom and intellectual independence, when firing a faculty member who has had something to say, perhaps about the Cold War or communists, that will make alumni yelp or newspapers sputter. I do not know of any easy way for the college to break out of the vicious circle of meeting unworthy or unjustified public expectations, and thereby building up more of these same expectations. I suspect that a significant beginning could be made by the action of a very few leading institutions, or perhaps even one. What is needed is a divorce from the status quo, a shedding of the fetters of Cold War commitments, and an intention to instruct the community both as to its true needs and the true goals of higher education. As I look around at the possibilities for such an eruption of reason in institutions other than the college, in corporations, the mass media, the political parties, unions, it seems far too much to expect. The march of any contemporary Davidsbündler against the Philistines will have to find its general staff and troops in the college. I see few stirrings today, although the participation of students and faculty here and there in sit-in demonstrations and peace activities are hopeful signs. I would feel far better about the chances if the sit-ins were being led by college presidents and trustees. I am committed to education, and therefore must never abandon hope that it may recover its devotion to mankind's highest values. Yet it must be recognized that this may be only wild optimism. We may in reality be faced with an irreversible case of what M.C. Richards calls institution poisoning. resulting from the hallucinatory effects of great power and wealth. The penalty you Americans are paying for affluence is a heavy one, Arnold Toynbee says. It is now threatening America's security, but it is also doing America graver harm than that. Affluence is estranging America from her own ideals. It is pushing her into becoming the policeman standing guard over vested interests. She now stands for what Rome stood for, unquote. The college is a major element in the forming of a nation's character and in deciding its destiny. The question is whether its role will be the noble and distinctive one to which by tradition it is assigned, or whether it will cooperate, because of the value it places on the expectations of society, in achieving the internal decay and disorder and international suicide dimly forecast by Mr. Toynbee. I believe it is touch and go.
You have been listening to W.H. Ferry, a vice president of the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions in Santa Barbara, discuss the college, its expectations and implications. The talk was originally delivered at Central Washington State College. This is Halleck Hoffman.